Delegators, welcome to another live stream with Titanode, the #1 place to delegate your stake. Today we're going to be talking about the best GPUs to be mining on Livepeer. Now, I get this question a lot, and I figured I would do a live stream covering all the different GPUs that can be used, as well as give you my idea of the top list of GPUs that are the best for video mining on Livepeer. So if you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Otherwise, let's just go through this together. So I will bring me down into the corner here. Oh, click the wrong thing. And I will just get started right away. I'm not going to waste too much time getting into the specifics. I'll just give you the idea of what I think is the best, and then I will give you the answers to why I think these are the best GPUs. So let's just get right into it. The #1 GPU that I would recommend for Livepeer, I have it listed out here. The #1 is the GTX 1070 or the GTX 1660 Super. Now, there's a lot of reasons I come up with this. These GPUs, they're not necessarily the best on the market, but they have a good amount of value and the best for video transcoding. And I'll get into why I think that's true, but I will go through the other ones as well. So #1, 1070s and 1660 Supers. Awesome GPUs for transcoding. The #2 is this any 10 series GPU. So the 1080, the 16 series, any card in the 10 series that have greater than 6 gigabytes of RAM. So for instance, there's a 1060 card, but it only has 3 gigabytes of RAM, but you can get the 6 gigabyte version. So you need to have 6 gigabytes or greater, and any 10 series card will work just fine. So that is my second recommendation for a card. So if you have these cards, they tend to be quite plentiful and cheap. These are great cards to use. The third is any 20 series card is going to be great. Fourth is any 30 series card. The reason the 20 series is above the 30 series is just simply price. The 30 series cards are really expensive, and you don't get any more performance out of them for video transcoding. So that's why these are above. Again, I'll go into the metrics of how I came up with these to begin with. A couple people in chat with us. We have Solar Farm, 1070 video over LOL. Yeah, I know, right? I have an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3060. Any thoughts on this? I will definitely get to that. The 3060 is actually a pretty decent card. Adam says sup. Thanks for joining us, Adam. So any 30 series card is #4. And then any Quattro card above the P2000 is also going to be sufficient, right? So if you have any one of these cards, chances are you're going to have a really good card for video mining on Livepeer. I want to make some other quick notes. The most powerful card that you could get for video mining right now is the RTX A5000. It's a Quattro. The only reason that this is not even in the top list is because I think this is about a $5,000 card. And it doesn't outweigh, it might give you double the performance of the 1070, like it might, but the 1070s you can buy for $500. So you could buy about 10 1070s for the price of one A5000, and the A5000 it's good, but it's not 10 times better, right? It's maybe 1.5 to 2 times better, right? And then another option here is the data center cards. These are the Tesla cards. If you are looking at data center setups, I would recommend the M60. This is only $500 cards that have decent transcoding abilities, or the Tesla M10. The Tesla M10 is going to be probably the most powerful card out of all of these cards individually. But again, the Tesla M10 is sitting around a $5,000 card, and it probably won't outperform individual cards like the 1070 or 1660 simply based on price point. So that is my recommendations, but now I want to jump into how I got to these ideas of what makes a good video miner. So if you have a card that's on this list, congratulations, you can hop right into video mining and you're going to do very well. Now, let's dive into why I got to this metric. Let's first off figure out what we need to do in order to get good quality video mining. So the first thing we're going to need, and these are some basic ideas, recommendations I have for why I came up with these. So the first is you're going to need greater than 6 gigabytes of RAM on the card. If you don't have greater than 6 gigabytes of RAM, you're going to max out your memory, and then you're just going to be maxing out on session limits, right? So the amount of sessions that you can do, the 1070 can do 20 sessions, so 20 streams per card, and that's using about 4.5 gigabytes of RAM. So if you're at 4 gigabytes, you're going to be limited to probably 16 sessions. And then if you're at like 3 gigabytes, you're going to be at like 12 sessions. So you're not unlocking the whole potential of the card. So anything, and there so many cards are out there have greater than 6 gigabytes of RAM. So I just recommend you might as well get the full use of the encoding chips in them and get a card with greater than 6 gigabytes of RAM. The next recommendation I highly recommend for cards is to have a greater than 1500 megahertz base clock speed. If we go back here, the Tesla M60 only has a base clock speed of 500, so it's really slow, but it happens to have 2 chips in it, so it kind of makes up for it. So that's why I do recommend this 1070 and the 1660 Super. They have high clock speeds. And in fact, the 30 series cards have lower clock speeds. So I'll jump into that in a little bit, but this is just my recommendations from my experience. The next you're going to want for recommendations is one power socket GPU. For instance, the 1080 has 2 sockets, so it has 2 8-pin sockets you need in order to power it, which means you're going to be messing around with adapters. If you're an ETH miner already, you're going to know the troubles of power supply and units. Luckily, transcoding on GPUs requires very, very little power. And so you don't need GPUs with 2 power sources. One 8-pin power source is going to be plenty, which comes back to why the 1070 and the 1660 Super are my favorite, because they only need one 8-pin power supply. Then the last thing is I like to have GPUs that are less than $1,000 to purchase. You can get the most expensive GPU, which is going to be, this A5000, but it's a $5,000 card, and it doesn't give you any more transcoding sessions, which means you're not going to actually generate any more revenue than some of the other cards that are under $1,000. So if you add up the price, the abundant amount of cheaper cards is going to give you probably the scalability you need to be really profitable in video mining, right? So those are the recommendations I have for a card. As new cards come out and as things change, this video might become, this live stream, recording might become outdated, but for right now, that's really what I highly recommend. So Adam says, hey, I've watched a bunch of your videos, just getting into this. Do you think it is pointless to start doing this on a home machine that I decided just as operating an orchestrator and transcoder? I do believe it's worth it. In fact, right now is probably your last chance to get into being an orchestrator before the barrier of entry becomes really high. I do believe that when layer 2 comes out, the barrier to entry is going to become so high that if you don't get in now, it's going to cost you tens of thousands, or if not $100,000 to become an orchestrator. And right now, it's just not that. So I do recommend that to Adam. And Adam says, I got a 1070 for it. Awesome. 1070s are awesome. Okay. Now I'm going to explain to you why I got to these metrics. And again, advocating the 1070 quite a bit, just out of my experience. 1080s are also good, by the way. I got a couple of those. So I'm going to quickly explain to you what happens when a GPU does video transcoding. Now, this is getting into the thick of things. So if you're new to video transcoding, this might be very helpful for you to understand what's exactly happening. Okay. So what we have is a stream. A stream is high definition typically coming in. So this is from Twitch, YouTube, the stream I'm doing right now, any Web3 product, anyone that's using Livepeer as a backend is going to be sending streams in HD, right? So 1080p. Well, what happens when that 1080p comes in? Well, this 1080p comes down and it gets sent to a transcoder, which is a GPU on the Livepeer network, and it has to be decoded, okay? The decoding process is taking 1080p and breaking it down into the raw video format, okay? This in here is going to be your raw video format, okay? It becomes raw, and then, and for instance, the 1070 has one chip in it for a decoding, right? Let's go with the 1660 because this is more closer to a 1660. It then has one encoding chip that can re-encode it into a different bit rate. So let's assume it goes into 480p, right? Because every time you watch a YouTube video or live stream on Twitch, you have the ability to choose what bit rates you want, right? So you can do HD, you can drop it down to 720 or 480, right? So what's happening here is you have 10 going in, 1080 going in, it's getting decoded and encoded into 480, okay? So this is about 1/4 or about 1/3 the size of the original 1080, okay? And you have one encoder, one decoder, and one encoder, okay? Now, what's happening here is the ability for it to decode is in just the number of pixels, okay? So this particular GPU, if you were to do 1080, you could encode and decode right into 1080, and it would be 1-for-1, okay? So this amount that you can do is going to be 1-for-1, which is this 1-for-1 on your chips. If you happen to have two of these encoding chips, so let's switch this over to a 2, this gives you the ability to do double the amount, okay? So let's bring out our trusty calculator. If you do 1080 times 2, then you're able to do 160 when it comes to the amount of pixels that you can transcode. So if you can imagine, there's some bottlenecks coming on with this. This is how the 1070 works. The 1070 has two decoding chips and encoding chips. If you go to the link in this video at the bottom, you'll bring up the developer tools for NVIDIA. Now, NVIDIA are the only cards that we can use on Livepeer. And on here, it has a list of all the encoding and decoding chips that are on all the NVIDIA GPUs, okay? So let's quickly take a look at the 1070. The 1070 under encoding, right? So we can expand that. The 1070 here, if we scroll down, it is this one right here, and we can see that it has two of these encoding chips, okay? So you can look down and see that it has two encoding chips, which means it has this exact setup where it can actually encode faster than it can decode, okay? But if we scroll down to the decoding, okay, this first part, most of these cards, by the way, on all these GTX models, have one encoding or decoding chip, right? Like none of them here actually have any more than one decoding chip, okay? So any of the GTX models stuck with one. Keep that in mind. It's really important. So this 1070 has one decoding chip, right? So that means the bottleneck is actually in the decoder, okay? And what happens is if we look at the amount of sessions a 1070 can do, we can do about 20 sessions, 20 streams in the decoding. The problem is this is our bottleneck right here, this decoder. It's not actually the encoding. The encoding we can do a lot more of. So I'm just going to give you an example of what, kind of clarify what I'm talking about. This is the session profile of a live GPU that's working on Livepeer right now. Okay, so this is a transcoder that's on Titan Node's Orchestrator, and you can see right here that we have 3 sessions in red. So 3 sessions are running in the 480p, and then you have 2 sessions in the blue, which is the 480 plus 720, and then you have 1 session in the 240, 360, 480, and 720p, okay? So I want to break that down what that means. If we go over here, I created another example of that second option for you. This is the 240, 360, 480, and 720p profile that I just talked about of one of our streams, what it's doing right now, okay? Well, what happens is that the HD comes in, it gets decoded, it goes into the raw video, it gets encoded, but then it ends up with this here. And what happens is now your bottleneck is actually your encoder, okay? So what happens is, because you can do 20 streams here, typically, but the problem is your encoding chip is equivalent to your decoding chip, right? And it can only do, I think, 16 sessions. So your max limit now becomes 16. So this is one of the benefits of having a 1070 over a 1660 or one of these other setups, is that by having two encoding chips, you can do more of this, okay? The real bottleneck, though, is the fact that right here we have more work being done at 480p, okay? So on a regular basis, no matter what card you get, your decoding is probably going to be your bottleneck, okay? So having 1-for-1 on your cards is probably going to be sufficient, but having 2 encoding can be helpful just because it can handle that boost, okay? So when you go to the matrix here, it's in the link. You can scroll down and see what your card does. I would say that most of the time, your encoding is not going to be the problem. It's going to be your decoding, okay? Your decoding chips are going to run into a much, the amount that it can do in coming in from HD is going to be limited, okay? Now, only when you get to the Quattros do you have the ability of getting multiple decoding chips on one GPU. The only one that I can actually find is actually the A5000 or the A6000. Now, again, the A5000 is what I recommended back here, but the problem is it doesn't do twice as much as the 1070 does for the amount it can do for $5,000, right? A 1070 you can buy for $500, right? So you can get 10 times as many decoding chips out of the 1070 for the same price as getting one A5000, okay? So you're really just limited. The amount of transcoding work you can do is limited by the amount of chips you have. That's basically the biggest bottleneck, okay? Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense for everyone. Adam, okay, interesting, thanks. What exactly is going to change about the barrier of entry? I'll talk about that in a sec. Hopefully they will support AMD later. So quickly, Adam, there's only 100 spots available in Livepeer, and so you cannot, as people get bumped out of the top 100, it becomes more and more expensive to get into the top 100, because the way you get into the top 100 is having enough LPT staked to you that gets you past the 99th or the 100th person. So then what happens is you bump someone else out, and then they stake more, and then they bump you out. And so it becomes a battle of rising, the rising bar to become an orchestrator, to get into the system. So yeah, the bar is already rising, so just keep that in mind. And Nickish says, hopefully they will support AMD. They will not support AMD at this time. AMD turns out have very poor encoding and decoding abilities. They can only get about, I think it was like 4 or 5 sessions per GPU or for their cards, and then NVIDIA can do about 20, right? So there's really no benefit of supporting a graphics card that can't really outperform a CPU. So they won't ever be supporting AMD, so I wouldn't hold your breath on that. NVIDIA is the only cards they choose. Okay. So back to this matrix real quick. I'll keep jumping into this. So we have these cards that have encoding and decoding chips on them. The more decoding chips, the better. I want to quickly jump into the Tesla decoding chips. This is the Tesla M10 I talked about. It has 4 decoding chips in them, which is really great. So this 10, and it's a database GPU, meaning the air flows from front to back, and it fits into a data center setup really easily. So I wouldn't buy a Tesla card if you're just running it at home, because you're gonna have to find a way to cool it, and it has CPU plugins for power, so it's a whole different setup. Only if you're doing data center stuff can you buy Teslas, in my opinion. The only problem with the Tesla M10 is that it can't do 4K decoding or encoding. And so that's a bit of a problem. You can do HD, which is like most of what Livepeer does, but in the future, we're going to have a lot more 4K work. And right now, if we go to the Tesla M10, this 4K button right here, it can't, oh, now I screwed it up. Anyway, it can't do 4K, right? So M10, 4K, it's actually the only card that doesn't accept 4K transcoding. So the Tesla M10 is an old card, so it's not very good. The Tesla M60 can do 4K, and it has 2 encoding and 2 decoding chips in it. So the 10, and it's only a $500 card. The problem with the M60 is that it has a slow clock speed. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into this real quick. So we talked about the price of these things. Let's talk about the clock speeds real quick. The ability for it to do 20 streams on that one decoding chip means it gets it done by how fast the clock can process the work, okay? If you have a 1660 Super, the clock speed is about 1530 megahertz. Let's quickly look up the 1070. The 1070, like, it starts at 1500, and the TI version gets up to 1600 megahertz. These are really fast cards, and they really help speed up the amount. You get more streams per card, per decoding chip based on its clock speed, right? So why does that matter? Because if you looked at a 3090, now the 3090 is a very powerful card, has 24 gigabytes of RAM. It's very expensive. I actually owned one at one time for transcoding, just to benchmark it. And its clock speed is only around 1395, okay? So it can do less streams than a 1070 because it has the exact same amount of chips in it, has the same one decoding chip, but it has a slower clock speed. So it can actually transcode at a slower speed. I guess the TI, the 3090 Ti has 1500. I didn't know that. I don't even know where to find a 3090 Ti. It's a very rare card right now, and probably very expensive. So for that matter, I would, 30 series cards are great, but based on clock speed, I would make sure you get the highest clock speed and above 6 gigabytes for the cheapest amount of price of getting the amount of decoding chips possible. Okay. Somebody in chat did talk about the 3060. Let's quickly bring that up. The 3060, again, the problem with the 3060, I was probably thinking of the 3070, to be honest. The 3060 has 1300 megahertz. So it's a fine card. Like if you already have a 3060, it's not going to make that big of a difference. You can definitely get probably 18 streams out of this card. It's got the 12 gigabytes of RAM, and the 30 series cards provide a ton of high quality transcoding, and it can do 4K, 8K, all these kind of things, right? So I would definitely use the 3060 if you already have one. Now, I wouldn't go out and buy a 3060 for the point of transcoding, because by the time you spend $1,500 on this card, you could buy 3 1070s, and you're going to get 3 times as many chips that do the exact same amount of work on each chip, right? So the key, I think, to video transcoding is finding cards that can do about 20 streams. So they have the one decoding chip at greater than 1500 clock speed and have greater than 6 gigabytes of RAM, okay? If you can find all 3 of those things, then it just comes down to price. And, these are the 2 best bang for your buck cards, I think, the 1070 and the 1660 Super. So hopefully that helps answer those questions. Okay. Yes, I definitely have a 3060 already in my PC. So then, yes, I would definitely use that card to transcode. It's going to get, in my guess, just off the top of my head. Actually, let's look it up right now. If we look at the 3060 under Consumer GeForce, the 3060, oh, they don't have it listed. Is it under the professional section? 3060. Surely it has encoding and decoding chips in it. Uh-oh. 10, 30. I would double check to make sure the 3060 has encoding and decoding chips in it, because according to NVIDIA's website, it does not. Right here, see the 2060 has one decoding chip in it, but the 3070 is where it starts getting decoding chips. I don't see one here for the 3060. I would double check. I actually doubt that the 3060 has encoding and decoding chips in it based on this. It would seem kind of weird that it doesn't, though. I don't know why it wouldn't. So you can definitely give it a try, but it might not work. So just double check. Okay, so we talked about clock speed, we talked about VRAM, the power sockets, and then less than $1,000. So, I mean, at the end of the day, any GPU that's with NVIDIA that has greater than 6 gigabytes of RAM is going to work really good. It just comes down to price point and whether, now if you're already an Ethereum miner and you have hundreds of GPUs or dozens or just 10, you can just probably go ahead and use those GPUs. And it doesn't really matter which model they are, because they're all going to max out at roughly the same amount of work based on the chips it has. If you're looking to go out and purchase a GPU, then you have to look at the cost analysis of this, because more RAM doesn't mean more decoding capabilities. That's just based on the amount of chips it has. Okay. Great. Adam says, so eventually, if the system built now, I can get bumped out. So eventually, even if I have a system built now, I could get bumped out. Yes, if you're an orchestrator and you're in the 100th spot, and somebody comes in and stakes more LPT to themselves than you have staked, you will be bumped out of the 100th spot and you will no longer receive transcoding work. So yes, that is true. So you have to put up enough capital to get in there and stay in there. Even if I'm having a decent time for a few months, yes. Yeah, you have to keep your stake up. It's just like a security network thing. Like, you can't just have everyone join the network. There has to be some sort of capital that says that you are being responsible enough to transcode. So the only other way to get around that is to join a pool, okay? So I want to quickly go over one last tool to help you kind of like tell you which GPUs work the best, especially as new ones come out. There is this website. It's in the link as well down below. And this gives you the ability to look at, it's called the Transcoding cheat sheet. And it was built by somebody, I don't know exactly who, but it gives you the ability to plug in which transcoding profile you want. And then it tells you how much sessions those GPUs can do. So for instance, if we just want to do 1080 to 1080, okay, which is like 1-to-1, so meaning one chip does to one, then you can see here that we have like a list of all the GPUs that can do well, right? So we have right here exactly the 1070, which is on the very end of this little bridge right here before it starts dropping off. It can do 22 streams when it's 1-for-1. And if you look straight across, you will get the 1660 as well. It does about 19 streams. And then if you look at a 2080 Super, it can do about 24 streams, right? So like the differences in amount of streams it maxes out at are almost all the same, but yet a 2080 Super is about 3-4 times more expensive than a 1070. So you're just not getting that much more value by having a nicer graphics card. But it does drop off steeply once you get to lower memory cards. Like if we come here to the what is this? Yeah, like the P1000, it only has 4 gigabytes on it, so it can only do 13 streams. The 1060 with 3 gigabytes of RAM could only do 10 streams, okay? So the difference between the 1060 and the 1060 6 gigabytes is actually almost double the streams, okay? You can see right here, the 1060 can do 10 streams with 3 gigabytes of RAM. The exact same card with 6 gigabytes of RAM can do 19 streams, right? So it's really important to make sure you have more than 6 gigabytes or greater of RAM in your GPU. Once you have that, then it just comes down to your encoding and decoding chips and the amount that you have, right? So, and then as you can see here, the M10, which we talked about earlier, it can do 46 streams, and that's just because it has 4 chips per card. But again, it can't do 4K. In fact, if we go onto this profile here and we do 4K to 1080, so you take Ultra HD, which is 4K, down to HD, which is 1080. The M10 from Tesla doesn't even show up. So again, and then if you come down to the 1070, it can do 6 of those streams, right? So you're taking high resolution, you're coming down. So, and then on here, apparently the RTX 8000 can do 24 streams with 48 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah, that's going to be a very expensive card. So, and then there's that 5000 card I talked about. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can do your own research and see what works best, but I would recommend these cards, and I hope that is really helpful if you're looking at either joining a pool or you want to set up your own Orchestrator transcoder, or however you'd like to proceed with transcoding in general on the Livepeer network. So, I hope that was helpful. I hope this was informative. If you like the video, please leave a like, a subscribe, and a comment if you have any questions. But otherwise, that is the video on how to choose the best GPUs. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.